Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome. We'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar to launch our new guidance, Advancing Climate Resilient Education. My name is Kirby Hensley, and I'm a policy advisor in USAID's Center for Education. I'll be facilitating today's webinar and like to share a few notes. Before we get started, first, the session will be recorded and made available following today's event, so please feel free to share the recording widely with any colleagues who aren't able to join us today. Only the speakers and slides will be visible on the recording. No attendee information will be shared or made available on the recording. At the end of the session, if you have any outstanding questions, please reach out to the EduClimate team at USAID by emailing educlimate@usaid.gov. We'll share that email again at the end of the session today, and it's on your screen now. We'll begin today's event with introductory remarks from Leanna Marr, the Deputy Assistant Administrator and Acting Senior Coordinator for International Basic Education at USAID's Center for Education. Leanna is a career Foreign Service Officer, and prior to joining the Center for Education, she served in Guinea, South Sudan, North Macedonia, Morocco, and in the Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs. Leanna, thanks for joining today, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirby. It's really great to be here, and it's exciting to see so many others joining, and the number of participants keeps ticking up there. So welcome, everybody. I know this is a topic of great interest to us all, so we're excited to see so many joining. So I am really super excited today to officially release our new guidance on advancing climate action through education. So since the release of USAID's new climate strategy, we've had a team of dedicated staff members from the Center for Education, working closely with staff from USAID's Center for Environment, Energy, and Infrastructure, and with support from our lead consultant, Dr. Christina Kwok, who's also here today, to develop this great guidance for you all. So the guidance covers practical examples for integrating climate action across the education continuum. It also highlights the need for and encourages greater cross-sector collaboration. And we really feel that cross-sector collaboration is going to be necessary and critical in order to achieve the objectives in USAID's climate strategy. We know that nearly all stakeholders across the sector are thinking through how to integrate climate considerations into their education programming. We've seen climate crisis have severe impacts on education, on numbers of days children are able to attend schools, on learning outcomes. So it's really important that we're collaborating and working on this. We are also looking at how to support resilience at both the individual and systemic levels. And I think that's an important part of our work that we do with our education and crisis and conflict. We saw with COVID how important that is, and with climate crisis and our climate action, it's equally important. So we hope this guidance will help spur innovation, facilitate collaboration, and lead to a growing portfolio of education programs that simultaneously contribute to the goals of USAID's education and climate policies. So I'm really looking forward to today's presentations, and more importantly, seeing how the guidance is brought to life by you all in the field. So thank you very much for joining us. And with that, I will turn it back to Kirby.
Thanks, Leanna. Appreciate you being here today. We're also joined today by Catherine Stratos, the Deputy Director of USAID's Center for Environment, Energy, and Infrastructure, leading on climate. Catherine joined USAID to work on its assistance program in Eastern Europe. She has managed agriculture, democracy, and governance and health projects, and completed a tour in Central Asia. She's also worked on climate and development full-time for the agency since 2012. So thank you, Catherine. Over to you.
Thank you, Kirby. Thanks for that nice introduction. And I just want to thank our educational colleagues for engaging with us and for embracing climate as a cross-cutting issue. We're really so impressed by your work and really excited to have you as partners. So we see education as critical in the struggle to contain and to adapt to climate change. To survive, we need to change how we live, how we work, what we value. So embracing a commitment to learn more sustainable approaches and to understand how better to protect ourselves and our homes and livelihoods really requires active collaboration with and leadership from the educational sector, from every school, every university. So for that reason, I very much appreciate the holistic approach that you've taken with the guidance. Its focus on learners and their needs as individuals is really great. The way that it looks at the educational sector in its broader climate, conflict, gender, and social context, and recognizing that there are feedback loops between those factors, negative and positive, I think is very important. One of the most important elements of the USAID climate strategy is its focus on systems change. And again, we can't do that without the education sector. So we are looking to you as partners in pushing for rapid, transformative change in climate critical sectors such as energy, agriculture, engineering. We really need your help to scale up change and to sustain it. And we also appreciate your willingness to engage with your partners to sensitize them and the children and people they're trying to reach on the risks that climate poses, whether it's to the educational objectives of the sector or to the lives of the people involved in it. And that can really start with making small changes, changes in how schools are sited and how they're built, in what is taught, in weaving examples into curricula, such as you talk about in your guidance, in disaster preparedness protocols. So this type of kind of integrative systems change really will better prepare the educational sector to navigate climate extremes and disaster, while doing your part to really drive an economy-wide and societal transition that we all need to be a part of in order to catch up with climate change and to get ahead of it. So with that, I just maybe want to mention one example that I came across probably a decade ago in Uganda that I thought was a really lovely example. It was trying to further the resilience of the agriculture sector, and it really was supported by and connected to key institutions and actors. So it connected farmers who were forward thinking with extension agents, with university researchers and faculty. And really, they were all learning from each other on what the climate challenges were that the farmers were experiencing, and on what they could do. They were really being informed by the scientific community in terms of advice and solutions. And then there was that response with the agricultural university updating its curricula, pursuing applied research, providing stipends for graduate students to study the impact of climate change. It was a really wonderful holistic approach, and it's one that continues today and is making a difference in people's lives today. So with that, I look forward to hearing about the many such inspiring examples of climate and education that you will be developing. And I thank you all for your partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. It's great to have you here today. And thank you as well for sharing that example from Uganda of how higher education institutions can be leveraged to connect key stakeholders and drive action in this space. We'll share a few more program examples later in today's session about other entry points that are included in the guidance, but first I think we should dig into the guidance itself. So here to share a bit about the technical guidance is Rebecca Pagel, Senior Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Advisor in USAID Center for Education, and Dr. Christina Kwok from Unbounded Associates, Rebecca is one of the co-leaders of the Center for Education's EduClimate Working Group, and Christina has been instrumental in working with us to develop the guidance. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Kirby. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you today. Our guidance, titled Advancing Climate Resilient Education, builds on the USAID 2022 through 2030 climate strategy, as well as the 2018 USAID education policy. It provides guidance on integrating climate action and awareness into education programs and is useful for both USAID mission staff and implementing partner staff. The guidance highlights USAID's commitment to achieving two parallel results: climate resilient education systems and climate resilient learners. The guidance is predicated on the idea that climate change affects education and that education in turn can affect climate change. So now we would like to learn your thoughts on how climate change affects education through a poll. Now, as we get this poll set up, I want to let you know that this poll is anonymous. So please feel free to share your thoughts. Okay, you can see the poll there now. The question is, how does climate change impact education? The first option is through the destruction of education infrastructure. Second, through impacts on household income, resulting in fewer resources to support schooling. Third, through reduced readiness to learn. Fourth, through reduced physical or mental health. Or lastly, all of the above. And you can make your selection now. Okay, great. Let's look at these results here. Hopefully you can all see them on your screen. Yes, most of you pointed out that all of these things are ways that climate change can impact education. And as we can see, the impacts on education can be broad and far-reaching. Thank you, Virginia. You can close that poll now for us. All right, so now let's take a deeper look at how climate change impacts education systems and learners. Climate change has both indirect and direct effects on education. For example, climate change may directly affect education by the degradation of learning environments, so that they are too hot, have too low air quality, etc., for learners to learn. Climate change may also affect education indirectly, for example, through reduced household income that may result in less investment in education. And all of these effects can be compounded by existing inequalities. But of course, education can also affect climate action. Now we would like to learn what you all are doing through education to affect climate action through a poll. All right, so now the question for you is, does your mission or organization manage or operate educational programs that contribute to the strengthening of climate resilient education systems or learners? Okay, great. Let's take a look at those results. Okay, wow. Many of you are already implementing or managing programming that seeks to strengthen the climate resilience of education systems or learners. It is true that climate change has far-reaching impacts in the education sector, but it's also true that education programs can contribute to the strengthening of climate resilient systems and learners. And it's really great to see that some of you have already recognized that need and are programming accordingly. Thank you all so much for sharing. Okay, now let's take a look at how education programming can contribute to the strengthening of climate resilience for both systems and learners. Education can directly improve human capital and pro-environmental behavior change. Indirectly, education can reduce extreme poverty and increase access to capital, resources, and technologies. When amplified by gender equity, peace and security, and climate justice, these effects can influence the adaptive capacity of countries and their education systems. Now that we have a sense of the background and context for this guidance, Christina will share a bit about how we can intentionally program for strengthening climate resilience in and through education. As Kirby mentioned, Dr. Kwok was the lead consultant who provided expert insight and led the drafting process for this guidance. Christina, we're so grateful for you and your insights. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. All right, so one of the main goals of this guidance document is to provide discrete steps for designing climate resilient education programming. So to introduce you all to these steps, we've organized them into 3 phases, which you can see here on the slide, and should also be very familiar to you. The guidance document uses these phases as practical entry points for systematically integrating climate considerations into activity design, monitoring, and evaluation. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of these 3 phases and then walk you through their steps. So first, we start with our context analysis. This is where we would want to examine and understand how climate change affects the local education system, what is the system's existing capacity to respond, and how these factors might inform education activity design, implementation, and measurement. And then next comes identifying opportunities and designing our interventions. And the aim here is to explore opportunities to strengthen resilience of learners and education systems, and to initiate thinking around intervention design where climate has been fully integrated into the interventions theory of change. So typically it's at this stage where we would review the available evidence to identify best practices when designing our interventions. However, due to limited existing evidence on integrating climate considerations into education, and especially in low-income country contexts, USAID missions and partners will really need to play an active role in helping to facilitate and to generate evidence through implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, which brings me to the 3rd phase, the measure and learn phase. So in the guidance document, we've expanded these 3 overarching program design concepts to include 7 discrete steps, which I'll introduce now. So if you go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the first part of the program design process is context analysis. So within this phase, there are 3 steps. 1, to identify climate hazards. 2, identify climate risks. And 3, identify climate assets and capacities. So when examining the climate hazards, it's important to focus on both sudden onset climate shocks and chronic climate stressors that are relevant to the local context. So climate shocks can include things like extreme storms and riverine flooding, and climate stressors can include things like drought and sea level rise. So the important thing here is that we want to ensure that we're not just looking at present day hazards, but also potential hazards in the near and the long-term future. Next, we want to understand climate risks. So step 2. So climate risks are the potential adverse impacts to the local education system and its learners caused by climate hazards. So for example, climate risks from extreme storms can include damage and destruction to school property, loss of instructional time, and psychological trauma that impedes the readiness to learn or to teach. The level of risk to the education system or to an individual educator or learner within the system is dependent on their exposure to the hazard, as well as their level of vulnerability. So it's important to consider both exposure and vulnerability when examining climate risks, as this can help us identify those people and places that are at greater risk, like adolescent girls in flood-prone rural areas. Then with step 3, we want to identify existing climate assets and capacities within the education system. So climate relevant assets include any material or immaterial aspects that can help to reduce the potential impact of climate hazards. For example, climate-proof school infrastructure, knowledge of climate solutions, or skills in disaster risk management. Climate resilient capacities enhance the system's or the individual's ability to act in the face of climate hazards, including in anticipation of the hazard to reduce potential impact, to cope with those hazards, whether they're a shock or a stressor, to adapt to both past or future hazards, or even to transform underlying causes of climate risk and vulnerability. The next phase of the program design process, as I mentioned earlier, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, is to identify opportunities to design interventions. So this part has two steps. So the first one here is to explore opportunities for action, and then the second is to design interventions in a theory of change. So the first step, or actually the fourth step in the entire process, is focused on exploring opportunities for action. So when doing so, it's important to consider actions for how they might contribute to climate mitigation, adaptation, or transformation, as well as for their potential to achieve systems change. So the next slide outlines the difference between these three types of actions in the climate context. So mitigative actions are those actions that avoid or reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases or promote carbon sinks. And carbon sinks are anything that's natural or otherwise that has the ability to absorb more carbon from the atmosphere than it releases. So things like forests, an ocean, the soil, or it can even include artificial means like carbon sequestration technologies. Adaptive actions include those actions that reduce the impacts of climate change, and transformative actions are actions that address underlying drivers of climate change and climate vulnerability. So when exploring opportunities for action, all three types of actions should be considered and evaluated. Going back to the next slide and back to our steps in this second phase of thinking is step 5. So we've just explored our opportunities for action, and now we can begin to incorporate the outputs from steps 1 through 4 into a theory of change and begin to design our interventions. And here it's important to keep in mind that programs should align with principles and priority areas of the USAID education policy, and should center the needs, experiences, and contributions of critical populations, and especially those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like girls and children with disabilities. The third and final phase of the program design process is to measure and learn. This phase includes our final 2 steps, which is to learn and adapt, and to monitor and report. So to help us learn from and adapt our interventions, it's essential to develop and implement climate relevant learning questions that can help generate data and insights. And so the guidance document also includes suggestions on how to proactively incorporate some of these learning questions and evidence generation activities into climate relevant education activities. And then finally, when monitoring and reporting, this last step encourages missions and partners to report on climate indicators or narratives that map to an education indicator. And the guidance document also includes a link to this mapping. So the goal here in this last step is to really try to articulate the education intervention's contributions to and its alignment with the USAID's agency's broader climate strategy. Next slide, please. So in addition to providing, here's the slide on the climate mapping. We could go to the next slide. In addition to providing these 7 steps for designing climate resilient education programming, the technical guidance also outlines 4 strategic entry points for applying climate resilient education programming across the education continuum. So these include education in crisis and conflicts contexts, pre-primary, primary, and secondary education settings, youth workforce development programming, and higher education institutions. So in education in crisis and conflict contexts, climate change exacerbates the already tenuous environmental conditions needed for the safe delivery of education. Climate relevant education programming can help build resilience at both the individual learner level as well as the systems level. And climate resilient systems can strengthen the resilience of the network of supporting services that surround children and youth in conflict settings through disaster risk management planning, and also helping to ensure some degree of continuity in learning and service delivery despite climate change. In pre-primary, primary, and secondary education settings, acquiring foundational learning skills is critical to building climate resilience at the individual level. And programs that seek to improve foundational learning skills can provide multiple entry points and opportunities for strengthening learners' climate resilience and increasing their awareness of climate change and positive environmental practices. When it comes to youth workforce development, the opportunities for applying this guidance through the development of youth livelihood skills are plentiful. Young people are central to developing local solutions to climate change and holding governments and societies accountable for creating a more equitable and inclusive path to a greener and fairer future. And in a climate impacted world, livelihood skills really should prepare youth for opportunities to engage in sustainable livelihoods that are both resilient to the impacts of climate change, but also can contribute to the protection, conservation, and restoration of Earth's natural resources. And finally, in a climate impacted world, the role and functions of higher education institutions themselves should be adapted and oriented towards achieving results that not only build climate resilience, but also promote sustainable development. So for example, local higher education institutions can be leveraged to achieve outcomes that meet both the climate resilience and development needs of their surrounding communities, while also meeting the goals and priorities of USAID's higher education program framework. So our next panelists will speak to 3 of these 4 strategic entry points, and they'll provide a project overview and discuss how their project contributes to strengthening the climate resilience of learners and education systems. And so I'd like to turn things back over to Kirby, who will introduce our panelists. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina, for the presentation and for partnering with us to develop the guidance. As Christina mentioned, we're delighted to be able to highlight 3 programs today that span the education continuum. Our first speaker is Dr. Monica Tan. Monica is a project management specialist in the Office of Education at USAID Philippines, where she handles the basic education portfolio. She has a wide range of experience in education programming, focusing on early grade education, education governance, and youth civic engagement. So Monica, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction. And let me start the program examples with the Philippine experience. So the Philippines is a country highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including sea levels rise, increased frequency of extreme weather events, rising temperatures, and extreme rainfalls. Impacts of climate change in the Philippines are immense, including annual losses in GDP, changes in rainfall patterns and distribution, droughts, threats to biodiversity and food security, and public health risks. Climate change also affects education. In the past 8 years, 93% of public schools in the country experienced natural hazards at least once, where close to 40,000 schools have been affected by tropical cyclones. More than 25,000 have been inundated by floodwaters, and almost 6,000 had faced coastal areas concerned. Next slide. USAID Philippines education programming have been advancing climate change action for the past years. One intervention we would like to zoom in on is our work on early grade learning. We partnered with our education ministry to integrate climate themes in the basic education curriculum. We do this through our materials development work under our flagship basic education activity called ABC Plus, or Advancing Basic Education in the Philippines. This activity works in partnership with the Philippine Department of Education to strengthen teacher professional development, improve availability and use of learning resources, and bolster education system capacity to support effective early grade instruction. And natural disasters don't discriminate based on age. Everyone in a community is affected when a typhoon hits, from the youngest to the oldest. Given that climate change is driving an increase in the number and severity of storms, floods, and drought, even young children need to learn to be prepared. So this underscores the need to promote climate resilience to ensure that our learners, even the very young ones, have the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to climate. We do this in 2 aspects: promoting disaster preparedness and disaster response. So in the provision of access to quality materials, next slide, we co-develop reading materials in the mother tongue with teachers and other community members. ABC Plus provides broad guidance on possible themes, sharing with them the main thematic areas of the curriculum alongside the social guidelines to ensure that they draw inspiration from the realities and local context as they create their own stories. One of the activity's intentions, beyond instilling a love of reading, is to build children's awareness of climate issues by using real-life examples, aligned with the priorities of the Department of Education. Next slide. Let me share with you 2 examples of books for kindergarten to grade 3 readers in the Philippines that include climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction as priority thematic areas. The first one here is Strola, Reina sang mga bausra, or Strola, the queen of garbage. The story is about, well, Strola, a plastic straw who was at first skeptical about people caring for the environment, but in the end was surprised to see waste segregation and recycling happening all around. A lot of the books we were able to create contains the theme of environment protection through litter prevention, recognizing that the Philippines is one of the world's largest sources of plastic trash. So the author is John Frederick Bugayon, is a science teacher and an environment advocate who wrote this story in the Hiligaynon language. He was bothered by the viral video of a sea turtle with a straw in its nose. So he wanted to tell the story of the impact of plastic on environment through the perspective of a straw. So in this book, kids can learn about why and how plastic pollution is bad. Moreover, they will also learn how to segregate and recycle plastic products to help establish a circular economy. From the field testing activities, we got the feedback that children like the emphasis on segregation and recycling of garbage. Grade 3 students, who are the target audience, enjoyed reading the story as it brings life and value in the things that people just throw away. The book is not only used in reading subjects, but also is being prepared to be used in science subjects as well. Here we are seeing an interdisciplinary approach to climate change education. Next slide. The second one is Ang Bata na Paruhunga, or The Curious Child, which is about a girl named Tanang, who's always curious and who loves to learn. One day, she's very curious about how her community shows care for the environment. She then discovered the concept of a compost pit, compost pile, recycling, and many more. Later on, Tanang became an advocate of cleanliness in their community. The story was inspired with the author's grade 3 pupils. So the author, Jury Gastardo, is a teacher, and her students always ask a lot of questions. So through this book, he wanted to inculcate to her student the value of caring for the environment by practicing the 3 R's. That is, reduce, reuse, and recycle, as well as awareness of the environmental risks caused by people's malpractice in disposing waste. And when we tested this book, we found that children related well to Tanang. The learners also asked similar questions and were excited to be part of Tanang's journey to understanding the 3 R's. Teachers also found the book useful as it acted like some sort of a guidebook on how to be an advocate for the environment. The book teaches its readers to reduce the amount of products they use, reuse products instead of throwing them away, and lastly, to recycle waste products. Green practices like these are simple ways kids can help decrease climate change and make a difference by reducing consumption. So the ABC Plus activity believes that by developing these climate change stories, early grade learners will be aware and learn the value of taking care of our environment, that it is our responsibility. We want to help our young learners understand the effects of climate change, how it affects them specifically, and more importantly, what they can do to mitigate these effects. Next slide. Also, we are responding to climate-related disasters. The ABC Plus activity has a strong emergency response capacity to minimize damage and disruption due to climate events. Immediately after emergency situations, we have always provided support towards normalcy by providing replacement of damaged learning and instructional materials, replacement of damaged furniture, and giving out learners kits in the form of school supplies. We do it through our Emergency Response Fund, which is a flexible fund we built into the activity. The idea is to restore a sense of normalcy in the children's lives, and schools are often the best way to provide this. For those who are temporarily displaced from their homes due to climate-related disasters, we find that schools can build belonging by helping children see themselves as integrally linked to others. We are connecting their day-to-day reality with sustained and future-oriented teaching and learning, underscoring the need for learning to continue no matter what. Thanks, and Kirby, back to you.
Thank you, Monica. Really glad to have you join us today and provide a great example of how to integrate climate issues into primary education. Our next speakers are going to join us from USAID Guatemala, and we'll speak about the strategic entry point of adolescents in youth workforce development. Ari Marina Sandoval serves as project management specialist in youth workforce development. Ari's worked for USAID Guatemala since July of 2011 and has been a member of the Education and Youth team since November of 2016, where she currently serves as the Youth Workforce and Development Specialist. We also have Ronnie Mejia, who serves as the Youth and Education Team Lead at USAID Guatemala. Ronnie has over 25 years of experience working in development projects and organizations, and has 15 years of teaching experience at the college level. All right, and Ronnie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And next slide, please. We are going to share information about the Puentes project that started in 2017, and we expect it to finish in 2025. And next slide, please. The Puentes project is focused on youth, and its main objective is to improve the quality of youth's life through employment, education, and funding to strengthen their opportunities and specifically to thrive in their communities. The initial phase of the project is for them to design and to implement a life plan that focuses specifically on education, employment, or entrepreneurship. And I'm not going to read all the accomplishments of the project, but I'm sure the slides are going to be shared. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Auri. So one of the tracks that the students in Puentes can choose is the track for agriculture under protected conditions, or Technified Agriculture. This program has turned out to be very relevant because previous interventions and commonplace knowledge is that youth are no longer interested in agriculture. However, we consistently find out that youth are really not interested in extensive low-yield agriculture, but these new options provided by Technified Agriculture have become very interesting for them because they let them use their land plots, which, by the way, are becoming smaller and smaller as the family multiplies, for production of innovative crops that require more advanced agricultural techniques. So the program includes both theory and practice, and the practice is carried out in 3 demonstration schools that are located in different regions of the country, and more than 3,300 students have gone through the program so far. Can we move to the next slide, please? So the program is transforming youth lives and their role in communities, but it also intersects with climate change mitigation and resilience at different points. On one hand, since this form of agriculture is carried out under controlled conditions and technified, it reduces the pressure for extensive agriculture. So there is less pressure to clear new land from forest cover. It means that smaller plots can be more efficient. And we are also noticing that many students are able to plant in plots that are closer to their communities. So that reduces the need for mobilization in motorized vehicles to the farming sites. The agriculture under protected conditions has allowed for crop diversification, which offers a wide range of business opportunities, of new business opportunities. Of course, these agricultural practices lead to much smarter and sustainable use of agricultural inputs, including fertilizers, pesticides, and especially water management. The program has allowed many women who have traditionally been sidelined from agriculture or from entrepreneurship to assume leading roles because they can establish innovative enterprises and becoming pioneers of new products in their communities. In many cases, the students have become the first producers of specialized products in their communities, which creates a much shorter supply chain, which of course has impacts in better quality of products, in lower impacts due to transportation and packaging. Such is the case of Estefania, whose picture we have here, who became the first local provider of strawberries for her region. And she sells all of her production in her community. And you saw Sarah and Angelica in our cover picture. They have a plant, a tomato growing and selling business in their community. The other interesting effect that we've seen is a multiplier effect, because the knowledge does not stay only with our students, as many of them are translating their lessons learned to their families, and have also set agricultural consulting businesses where they are helping other farmers improve their practices. As a side note, since we have the students in the school, they do receive a reproductive health model as part of the training. If we can move to the next slide, please. And this, of course, was the low-hanging fruit. So we decided to focus more on the agricultural side, which we think intersects nicely at several points. We also have included a clean energy training component as part of Puentes. There are basically two realms in which we're doing the clean energy training. On one hand, there is a clean energy module that has been implemented as complementary to the agricultural program. So the agricultural schools are becoming demonstration sites for clean energy implementation. And we have mechanical water systems, and we have solar energy that's being demonstrated at the schools. But Puentes also developed a specific curriculum for solar energy technicians. As some of you know, solar energy is growing big in areas with high levels of rurality like we have in Guatemala. So the curriculum has been discussed and approved with the Ministry of Education. However, the initial implementation demonstrated that rural students lacked the basics in entry-level electricity. So we have had to modify the curriculum. So now the students take one module, which is basic introduction to electricity, and then they move on to the more specialized module on solar energy. And we're working on the second cohort of students going through the solar energy course, but we do know and we do think that there is a good potential for them to become self-employed and to provide assistance to all of the people who are purchasing solar technology out on the fields. Next, please. So basically, in a nutshell, those are the points where we see Puentes intersecting with climate change. I do want to share some of the stories of these youth. On the top left corner, these youth are participating in their municipal youth council and discussing all of the things that are relevant to development in their community, including environment and water management topics. So after going through Puentes, they feel empowered enough and they organize themselves to seek voices in their local institutions. Fernanda on the top right corner is doing research with forest microbiota for enhanced production in greenhouses. Again, a rural indigenous woman who is a leading researcher. And of course, on the lower left corner, some of our solar energy students doing their practices. And on the lower right corner, we have Jose and Angel, who have been able to increase their production and to improve their honey producing, their bee honey producing business, thanks to research that they have been conducting online and thanks to online trainings that they've been able to pursue after going through Puentes. And they have a very nice and growing bee honey producing business. As you can see, of course, we have interventions in other realms that intersect, but we were interested in sharing what our youth and workforce development program is doing. Thank you very much. And back to Kirby.
Thank you, Ari and Ronnie. That's a really impressive program and grateful to have you here today to share it. So we'll now move to our final speakers who are going to join us from USAID Liberia. And we'll speak about partnering with higher education institutions to drive climate action. So Moses Jagaba serves as the Natural Resource Management Specialist with USAID Liberia in the Office of Economic Growth. He has over 13 years of experience managing projects in natural resources, agriculture, climate change, and forestry in Liberia with USAID and other international and non-governmental organizations. Moses is joined today by Dr. BK Robertson, whom he will introduce in just a moment. So over to you, Moses.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Moses P. Virginian, and I work for USAID Liberia and sit in the Office of Economic Growth as the Natural Resource Management Specialist, as you have heard. I have been with USAID for the past almost 4 years, and I'm really pleased to be part of this all-important program. I'd like to inform you that our collective work has immensely contributed to the design. We have had a strong collaboration, let me say firstly, with the Education Office in Liberia, and our collective work has immensely contributed to the design and implementation of the ongoing higher education for conservation activity that is implemented by the University of Georgia and the consulting partners. The activity is a 5-year program that engages in forestry, biodiversity, and conservation education to build workforce capacity that will enhance workforce development in Liberia. I have the honor to introduce to you Dr. B.K. Barker Robertson, who is the Chief of Party for HECA program, and he will be doing for us a presentation on how the higher education money is going to impact our climate change in Liberia. So Dr. BK, it's over to you. Hello?
Thank you, Moses. I'm on mute and I was just trying to tune in. Thanks for that wonderful introduction and brief summary of our program. Again, as Moses said, my name is B.K. Robertson, and I'm the Chief of Party of the USAID's Higher Education for Conservation activity. As you can tell, we are the new kid on the block. As you can also see, can I have my slide up, please? We have only one slide. That's an indication that we are the new kid on the block. Let me start with a brief summary. The Higher Education for Conservation activity, which is acronym HECA, became effective on August 21st, 2022. HECA is led by the University of Georgia, as Moses mentioned earlier, and also a team of collaborating partners listed on the slide: Alabama A&M University, Tuskegee University, the Wesley Center for Women, and the University Consortium for Liberia in the US. And as well as for the Liberian partners, we have the University of Liberia and the Forestry Training Institute in Liberia. The overarching goal of HECA is to build skills Liberia's forestry and natural resource workforce to support the conservation and sustainable use of natural forest resources while advancing economic development, gender equality, youth empowerment, and the social inclusion of marginalized and vulnerable populations. We plan to accomplish these goals through strengthening Liberia higher education institutions to offer forestry, biodiversity, and conservation curricula, and define core curricular activities that build professionals' knowledge and develop the workforce soft skills needed to work effectively with diverse stakeholders within government, the private sectors, NGOs, and communities. Our key activities, as you see on the slide, our key objectives will include to develop a curricular resources for skills development, and also to strengthen capacity and facilitate excellence. Let me put a video. Let me put video on so you guys can see. Now, these objectives, how do we plan to achieve them. First, we would establish a center of excellence, which is now almost done. And it's going to be located within the University of Liberia Science and Technology Complex. The photo over there just gives you a little bit of hint what the complex. It doesn't give you an absolute impression, but that's a photo of the complex part of it. And it was named the Center of Excellence for Forestry, Biodiversity, and Conservation. It is a key delivery mechanism through which the HECA activities will be channeled. But how are we linked to climate change? Quick background, Liberia is one of the few remaining rainforest nations in the world. Its 40% portion of the Upper Guinean rainforest is a vital natural resource essential to maintaining West Africa's biological heritage, meeting global carbon emissions reduction targets, and reducing the extent and effects of climate change. I also like to mention poverty, population growth, illegal logging, bushmeat hunting, and the lack of adequate forest management capacity pose critical threats to Liberia's forests and wildlife. However, Liberia's workforce in forestry, biodiversity, and conservation is underdeveloped, and the capacity of higher education institutions to educate, train, and professionalize this workforce requires strengthening. So to achieve this, Liberia higher education institutions must improve their ability to identify and implement the curricular reforms in the forestry education sector. Incorporating experiential learning to facilitate soft skills acquisition and to apply these capabilities to develop a pipeline of young Liberian professionals who possess the knowledge and the skills to meet the demands of sustainable forests. Sustainable forests, of course, is essential because of the carbon sequestration, which help mitigate climate change. Now, in taking steps to strengthen those higher education institutions' capacity, there is also a need to account for the challenges of rural community well-being, including greater social inclusion of historically marginalized and vulnerable groups. And some of my colleagues have already mentioned some of those vulnerable groups. And so this would enable us to hone the ability of learners to interact constructively with diverse community stakeholders. We basically want to train the trainers. So HECA will achieve these objectives through the creation of a Center of Excellence for Forestry, Biodiversity, and Conservation. We simply name it the FBC Center. So the FBC Center will serve as a conduit through which the higher education institution capacity will be strengthened to implement the FBC curricula and facilitate the development of critical soft skills within the FBC workforce. We have here what we refer to as HECA's key sub-activities. Consequently, fall into 6 lines of action around which this presentation is organized. So
Dr.
I will start.
Robertson, just wanted to say we've got about 1 minute left if you want to wrap things up.
I'll wrap up quickly.
Thank you.
The the first line of action is the establishment, as I said earlier, and the operationalization of the FBC Center as an independent entity to coordinate all of these capacity building efforts. And the second would be the development of a development and delivery of a model national FBC curriculum to be housed and socialized through the FBC Center. Third would be the development and the delivery of a multidimensional soft skills core curriculum with personal, social, cognitive, cultural, and professional components to enhance the efficiency of the FBC workforce. Fourth is the creation and the coordination of a set of capacity strengthening activities for HER faculty, the students, and professionals that improve their effectiveness in the FBC labor force. The fifth is the development of a comprehensive social inclusion strategy customized for the FBC sector that includes women, youth, people with disability, forest-dependent people, and first-generation HEI students. Finally, ensuring that the higher education activities help to facilitate socially inclusive green enterprise development. With that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson, for the great presentation, and thank you, Moses, for joining us as well. With that, that'll conclude today's presentations. I'd first like to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thank you again to all of our great panelists and speakers who presented the guidance and also shared 3 diverse examples of how climate can be integrated into education programming. Your contributions and efforts to integrate climate in education are truly appreciated by those of us at the Center for Education at USAID, as well as the sector more broadly. I encourage everyone to read the new guidance and also take a look at the resource that we mentioned earlier that maps education and climate indicators. We'll drop the link into the chat now. We hope that you find these resources useful as you consider how to integrate climate in education programming going forward. We'd also love your feedback, particularly around what additional resources or information would be helpful as you move forward in this space. Or also please reach out to us if you have any questions or additional input to share. You can contact us directly by emailing educlimate@usaid.gov or reaching out to any of the speakers today, and we can always get back to you if you have any questions. So thank you again for joining us. We'll end today's session here, and I hope everyone has a great day.
You. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Kirby. Nice interpretation.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.